She wrapped her little son and closed her eyes to die in the cold, but woke up when a man warmed them. The wind howled like a living thing, screaming against the endless white. Snow whipped through the air in jagged sheets, biting into exposed skin like shards of glass. The world had been reduced to cold and silence, except for the soft whimper of a small child pressed against his mother's chest. She held him tighter, her trembling arms wrapping around his tiny body, as if she could shield him from a world that wanted to erase them both. Her skin, a deep emerald green that seemed almost to glow under the pale light of the storm, was slick with melting frost. Her black hair, heavy with ice, clung to her face. Her lips, once vibrant, now shivered with a bluish tint. The child, no more than 3 years old, buried his face against her neck. His little hands, the same green hue as hers, clutched desperately at her cloak. His breath came in shallow bursts, fogging the air between them. She could feel him fading, and that knowledge carved a hollow inside her that no fire could ever fill. "Just a little longer, my heart," she whispered in her native tongue, the words soft and melodic despite the chill in the air. But even as she said them, she knew it was a lie. The storm was winning. The cold had seeped into her bones, into the child's fragile body, and there was no shelter for miles. Her species was not meant for this kind of winter. Back on her home world, the skies had burned orange and gold, and the ground had been soft with moss that warmed beneath bare feet. But that world was gone to her now. She was in exile, and on this frozen wasteland of Earth's northern plains, she and her son had become ghosts before their time. She sank to her knees in the snow, the weight of exhaustion pressing down like an invisible hand. The child whimpered again, a sound so soft it nearly broke her. She smoothed his hair back with trembling fingers, her tears freezing before they could fall. "I wanted to give you more than this," she murmured, her voice breaking. "A life without fear. A place where you could run beneath the sun and laugh until you couldn't breathe. I'm so sorry." She shifted, wrapping her cloak tighter around him, curling herself like a cocoon to shield him from the wind. If they were going to die, she wanted him to feel her arms one last time, warm as they could be. Her eyelids grew heavy. The cold was no longer biting but soft, like a lullaby. That was the danger, when the cold stopped hurting. She kissed the child's forehead and closed her eyes. And then there was a sound. Not the wind, not the storm, something else. Boots, crunching through the snow. Heavy, human. Her eyes fluttered open, vision hazy. Through the swirling white, a shape moved, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in furs. A human man. He shouldn't have been here. No one should have. This place was nothing but ice and death. He stopped when he saw them. For a second, they stared at each other through the storm, two worlds colliding in a silence more deafening than the wind. His breath caught. He had never seen anything like her. "Jesus," he muttered, the word torn away by the gale. She wanted to speak, to tell him to take the child, to run, but her lips wouldn't move. She couldn't lift her head. All she could do was tighten her grip on her son, as if that single act could keep him tethered to life. The man moved. Fast. Dropping to his knees beside her, he ripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around both of them without hesitation. She felt the sudden warmth of his body heat against her frozen skin, and it nearly made her sob. "Stay with me," he said, voice low and steady, though his hand shook as he checked the child's pulse. "Don't you dare give up on me. Not now." She blinked, confusion and relief swirling in her fading consciousness. Why? Why would this human risk himself for a stranger, for something not even of his kind? His arms slid under her and the child, lifting them both as if they weighed nothing. He pulled them close to his chest, his breath ragged against her hair. "I've got you," he whispered. "You're not dying out here. Not today." As he started moving, his warmth pressed against her, chasing back the cold like a living fire. The child stirred weakly, a faint whimper escaping his lips. That sound was everything. For the first time since the storm began, she felt a spark, a fragile, trembling thing inside her chest. Hope. And then the world went black. When she woke, there was no wind, no biting snow tearing at her skin. Instead, there was warmth, real warmth. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, struggling to adjust to the dim orange glow dancing across the walls. A fire. The smell of wood smoke filled her senses, sharp and foreign. Beneath her, a thick blanket wrapped her body, and something softer than ice pressed against her back. For a heartbeat, she thought she was dead, that the storm had claimed her, and this was some afterimage of life, a memory fading into whatever came next. But then she heard it, a small, soft sound. Her son. Her head snapped down despite the heaviness in her muscles. The little boy was curled against her chest, his tiny green hands clutching the blanket. His breathing was slow but steady, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was color in his cheeks. A sob tore from her throat before she could stop it. She held him closer, pressing her lips to his forehead. He stirred faintly, murmuring something incoherent in their tongue. Alive. He was alive. You're awake. The voice made her freeze. Deep, warm, undeniably human. She turned her head, and there he was, the man from the storm. He sat a few feet away, feeding another log into the fire. His face was rough from the cold, a few days' worth of stubble covering his jaw, and his eyes were locked on her, cautious but not cruel. He had removed his heavy coat and draped it over her and the child. Beneath it, he wore a thick wool sweater, damp from melted snow. His boots were propped near the fire, steam rising from them. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. The crackle of the fire was the only sound between them. She wanted to speak, but the words in his language came slow. Earth tongue was harsh on her lips, not like the fluid cadence of her own. You saved us. His jaw tightened, as if the sound of her voice startled him. You were dying out there, he said simply. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't have. She had seen what fear did to humans when faced with what they didn't understand. They would have left her. They would have run. But this man hadn't. He shifted, leaning his elbows on his knees. What are you? He asked finally. The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't said with hatred, only quiet confusion. She swallowed, brushing her hand over her son's hair, as if shielding him from the weight of the words. I don't belong here, she said softly. He gave a short, humorless laugh. I figure that much. For a moment, she thought about lying, about saying she was some genetic experiment gone wrong, a freak accident of science. But the exhaustion in her bones left no room for deception. I am not from this world, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes didn't widen in fear. Instead, he stared at her, silent, as though the pieces in his mind were clicking into place. He looked at her son, then back at her. The muscles in his jaw worked. You've got a kid, he said finally. She nodded once. My heart, she murmured, using the name she always called her child. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. You can't stay out there. The storm's not letting up for days, maybe weeks. You step back into that cold, you're dead before nightfall. She hesitated. This place, this cabin, it was his sanctuary. She had stumbled into his world uninvited. She could feel the tension in the air, not anger, but the weight of a man who understood danger and what it cost to keep it out. Why? The word slipped out before she could stop it. Her voice cracked, raw and aching. Why did you save us? His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. Because no one deserves to die like that, he said. Not you. Not him. Something in her chest tightened painfully. She had expected fear, hatred, pity even. Not this quiet, unwavering humanity. He stood and moved to a battered wooden cabinet, pulling out a pot and some dried meat. You both need food. Water. He glanced at her over his shoulder. You speak English well enough. She nodded faintly. Good. Then you'll understand me when I say you're safe here. Safe. The word hit her like a physical thing. It had been so long since that word meant anything. As he prepared the pot over the fire, she studied him in the flickering light. His movements were deliberate, efficient, a man used to surviving. His hair was dark and slightly curled at the ends, his shoulders broad under the worn sweater. There was a scar along his forearm, pale against tan skin. Her son stirred again, and she stroked his cheek softly. His eyes opened just a little, revealing the same deep green as hers. He blinked at the fire, then at the man, and whimpered. The man turned, kneeling beside them with a gentleness that startled her. Hey, little guy, he murmured. His voice softened in a way she hadn't expected. You're safe now. You hear me? Safe. The boy reached a tiny hand out, fingers brushing the man's sleeve. The man froze, then carefully let the child grip his finger. A strange, fragile silence filled the room. Not fear, not suspicion. Something else. Something that made her heart ache in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. The storm hadn't eased by morning. If anything, it had grown angrier overnight. The cabin creaked under the weight of ice, wind rattling the shutters like the fingers of something trying to get in. She sat near the fire, her son still curled in her lap, his tiny breath steady. The human man, she had learned his name was Daniel sometime in the night, moved quietly around the small cabin. His movements were practiced, almost ritualistic, checking the woodpile, reinforcing the door, making sure the fire wouldn't die. It was strange, watching him. His world was so different from hers, yet survival looked the same no matter what planet you were on. Her eyes met his when he returned to the fire with 2 steaming cups of water. He handed her one without hesitation, their fingers brushing for the first time. Heat flared in her skin at the touch, a reminder that she was still alive. "Drink," he said simply. She obeyed. The warm liquid slid down her throat, and she had to close her eyes for a moment. It was such a simple thing, but it felt like salvation. Daniel crouched near the fire, studying her in the flickering light. "You've got to tell me," he said quietly. "Are there more of you? Out there?" She hesitated. The truth felt heavy on her tongue. "No," she whispered. "We are all that's left." Something flickered in his eyes. Pity, maybe, or anger at a universe cruel enough to leave a mother and child alone in the snow. Before either of them could speak again, the sound came. A low hum. Mechanical. Her head snapped toward the window. The sound cut through the howl of the wind like a blade. Daniel noticed the sudden tension in her shoulders and went still. "What is it?" She swallowed, her grip tightening on her son. "They found us." The words were barely a breath, but the fear behind them was unmistakable. Daniel rose silently, moving to the window. He eased one shutter open, just enough to peek outside. At first, he saw nothing but white. Then, through the sheets of snow, a shadow moved, sleek, metallic, hovering just above the drifts. A faint blue light swept across the landscape, like an unblinking eye. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. Her heart pounded. She didn't have to look to know. "Hunters," she said. "They don't stop until everything is gone." Daniel turned back to her, his expression shifting into something hard, focused. "You need to tell me everything. Right now." There was no time to explain all of it. No time to tell him about the war that had consumed her people, about the exile that had sent her hurtling through the stars with only her son and the hope of finding somewhere safe. All she could manage was, "If they see us, they won't let us live." The hum grew louder. The boy stirred in her arms, letting out a small whimper. Daniel moved fast. He doused the fire with a heavy blanket, plunging the room into dim gray light. "Follow me," he whispered. She hesitated only a second before standing, clutching her son against her chest. Daniel led her to a trapdoor in the corner, hidden beneath a rug. He yanked it open, revealing a narrow cellar below. The air was cold and smelled of earth and wood, but it was shelter. "Get in," he said. She slid down the ladder carefully, curling herself around the boy. Daniel followed, pulling the trapdoor shut above them. The cabin fell silent except for the muted howl of the wind. Then the hum passed overhead. She pressed her forehead to her son's, holding her breath. Daniel crouched beside her, every muscle in his body coiled tight. Through the thin wooden boards, they heard it, the faint sound of something scanning, the whir of machinery against the storm. Minutes felt like hours. The boy whimpered again, and she kissed his hair, whispering soft words in her own language. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the sound began to fade. The hum grew distant, swallowed by the storm. Daniel exhaled slowly, leaning his head back against the cellar wall. "You're going to have to explain a hell of a lot when we get out of here," he murmured. She met his gaze in the dim light. "If I tell you, you won't look at me the same." He gave a short, quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Lady, you've got green skin and you fell out of the sky or something. I don't think there's much left to surprise me." Something about the way he said it, steady, calm, almost protective, made her chest ache. The boy shifted again, his little fingers clutching Daniel's sleeve. Daniel glanced down, and for the briefest second, something softened in his eyes. Above them, the wind screamed against the cabin, but for a heartbeat, the world below felt almost still. The cellar stayed silent long after the hum faded. The only sound was the boy's slow breathing and the muted groan of wood shifting under the weight of snow. Daniel didn't move until he was certain the sound was gone. When he finally pushed the trapdoor open, cold air spilled into the narrow space. He climbed up first, then reached a hand down for her. She hesitated for half a second before letting him pull her up, her son still nestled against her chest. The fire was dead. The cabin was dark except for the thin gray light leaking through the cracks in the shutters. Daniel crossed the room and glanced out the window, his shoulders tight. "They didn't see us," he said finally, relief in his voice. But she didn't feel relief. Her entire body was rigid, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "They will come back," she said quietly. "They always come back." Daniel turned to her, his jaw set. "Then we don't wait here." Her breath caught. "The storm. I've lived through worse." His voice was steady, but his eyes told another story. He knew the risk. He also knew staying was worse. She sank onto the edge of the cot, clutching her son. He stirred faintly, eyelids fluttering. "He won't survive another night out there," she whispered. Daniel crouched in front of her. His hands were rough, calloused, but he reached for hers anyway. "He won't survive if they find you here either. You said it yourself. So we move. We find somewhere they can't track you." She looked at his hands, wrapped around hers. Human skin against alien. It should have felt wrong, but instead it grounded her. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice cracked. "You don't even know what I am." His eyes held hers, unwavering. "I know you're a mother." "That's enough." The word struck something deep in her chest, a wound she didn't know she was carrying until that moment. He stood, moving quickly. "I've got a snowmobile out back. It's loud, but it'll get us further than walking. There's an old ranger station about 10 miles from here. If we can make it, we might be able to wait out the worst of the storm." She nodded slowly, the weight of the choice pressing down on her. Stay and die. Move and maybe live. Daniel gathered supplies with a precision that spoke of long years surviving in places no one else would go. He handed her a thick wool blanket, then a pair of oversized boots. She stared at them, unfamiliar with their design, until he knelt and helped slip them on her feet himself. The intimacy of the gesture caught her off guard. His hands lingered just a second longer than necessary, as if assuring himself she was real. "Wrap him tight," Daniel said softly, nodding to her son. "Keep his face covered from the wind. You keep your head against mine when we ride. The cold will hit you harder without it." She followed his instructions silently, tucking the boy close, wrapping both of them in the thick blanket. Daniel opened the back door, and the storm screamed in like a living thing. The world outside was a white void. The snowmobile sat half buried under a drift, but Daniel moved with calm efficiency, brushing off the snow and checking the engine. He climbed on and reached a hand back to her. Her heart thudded. This was it, the choice that would decide whether her son lived or died. She climbed on behind him, pressing her body to his back, the boy cradled safely between them. The warmth of his body seeped into hers through the layers of clothing, a small defiance against the brutal cold. "Hold on," Daniel said over his shoulder. The machine roared to life, loud against the silence of the frozen world. The vibration thrummed through her chest as he gunned the engine, and the snowmobile lurched forward into the storm. The wind hit them like knives. Even with her head pressed to his shoulder, the cold burned her lungs. The boy whimpered against her chest, and she tightened her hold, murmuring soft words in their language. Daniel leaned into the machine, steering through the whiteout with practiced skill. She had no idea how he could see anything in the blinding snow, but his movements were steady, sure. Minutes blurred into an endless rush of wind and white. Every second felt like a lifetime. Her arms ached from holding her son so tight. Her body shook, not just from the cold, but from the fear gnawing at her chest. Then, through the storm, came the sound. That low, mechanical hum. Her blood turned to ice. "Daniel," she cried over the wind. He heard it too. His jaw clenched as he pushed the machine harder. The hum grew louder, closer. A faint blue light pierced the storm somewhere behind them. "They're tracking us," she gasped. Daniel's voice was harsh against the wind. "Then we don't stop." The snowmobile tore over the drifts, the engine screaming as the storm swallowed them. The boy cried softly against her chest, and she kissed his forehead, tears freezing against her lashes. Thumb was almost on top of them now. A beam of light cut through the snow, sweeping dangerously close. Daniel veered hard left, the snowmobile skidding dangerously before catching again. "We're not dying here," he shouted. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of the engine, the boy's cries, and the feel of Daniel's heartbeat pounding through his back. She didn't know if they would make it. She didn't know if there was even a safe left in this frozen world. But as the storm raged and the hunters closed in, she pressed her forehead to Daniel's shoulder and whispered, "Please, don't let us go." Somewhere deep inside, a spark of something impossible flickered to life. Trust. If you've ever believed that love can be born even in the coldest places, follow this story to see what happens next. Sometimes, the smallest act of humanity can change the fate of an entire world. The storm swallowed the sound of the engine long after Daniel killed it. For a few moments, there was only silence, broken by the harsh, uneven rhythm of their breathing. The snowmobile sat buried halfway in a drift where it had finally given out, its engine smoking faintly in the frigid air. Daniel slid off first, his legs unsteady from the ride. He turned quickly, reaching for her and the boy. His hands were firm but gentle as he helped her down, his gaze darting to the little green face tucked into the folds of the blanket. "He's breathing," Daniel said, more to himself than to her, and something in his voice cracked. She nodded faintly, her arms tightening around her son, as if the storm itself might rip him away. Her lips were numb, her voice barely audible. "Where are we?" Daniel glanced around. The world was still a white void, but in the distance, a dark shape broke the monotony. His shoulders dropped a fraction. "Ranger Station. We made it." She followed his gaze, her heart pounding. The building was little more than a shadow against the storm, a squat structure of wood and metal half buried under snow. But it was shelter. It was hope. Daniel took her arm carefully, his touch steady despite the way his own fingers trembled. "We move fast. Keep 'em covered. The cold will bite harder now that we're off the machine." She nodded, though her legs felt like lead. Every step through the snow was a battle. Daniel stayed close, his body a shield against the wind. By the time they reached the door, her vision was blurring at the edges. Daniel slammed his shoulder against the frozen wood until it gave way with a splintering crack. The rush of still, icy air inside felt like relief compared to the screaming wind outside. He kicked the door shut behind them, then turned, catching her just as her knees buckled. "I've got you," he murmured, lowering her gently to the floor. "You're okay. You're okay." Her son whimpered softly against her chest. The sound was weak, but it was sound. She pressed her lips to his forehead, whispering soft words in her native tongue. Her tears froze against his skin. Daniel moved quickly, stripping off his outer coat and draping it over them both. He rummaged through the dark room until he found a lantern and some matches. The first spark of light flickered weakly against the walls, revealing a single small room, a cot, a rusted stove, and shelves lined with emergency supplies. He dropped to his knees beside her, his eyes scanning her face, then the boy's. "You both need heat now." She met his gaze, her own voice shaking. "You saved us again." Daniel gave a short, rough laugh. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this." He worked fast, lighting the stove and feeding it kindling until a small flame began to take. The heat was faint but growing, filling the air with the sharp scent of smoke. She shifted the boy carefully, letting his tiny hands rest near the warmth. His eyes fluttered open just a little, deep green irises catching the faint light. Daniel froze for half a second, staring at the boy as if something in that gaze broke him in ways he didn't understand. He reached out slowly, letting his fingers brush the child's hand. "You're tough, little guy," he murmured, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Tougher than most men I've known." The boy made a faint sound, a soft hum that almost sounded like trust. The alien woman swallowed hard, her eyes on Daniel. You didn't have to do any of this." Daniel's gaze lifted to hers, steady and unwavering. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did." The words sank deep. She didn't know this man. He didn't know her. And yet, here he was, risking everything for a stranger, for a mother and her child who didn't even belong to his world. The wind screamed against the walls, but inside, the small space felt still. Daniel leaned back against the wall, his breath finally slowing. "You gonna tell me your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "Syrah." He repeated it under his breath, like testing the weight of it. "Syrah." His lips curled into the faintest smile. "And him?" She glanced down at the boy, brushing his hair back. "Lior." Daniel nodded once. "Syrah and Lior." "Got it." The boy blinked up at him, and for a fleeting second, Daniel smiled. It was small, tired, but it was real. The warmth in the room grew slowly, seeping into frozen bones. Syrah shifted closer to the stove, her body curling protectively around Lior. Daniel stayed near, his presence solid and grounding. For the first time since the storm began, Syrah let herself breathe. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere in the distance, the faint mechanical hum returned. Syrah's eyes snapped open, meeting Daniel's. He heard it too. "We don't have much time," she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we make every second count." The storm outside showed no mercy, hammering the ranger station with ice and snow. But inside, a fragile kind of peace began to settle. The small, cramped room felt alive, not with warmth alone, but with something else. Hope. Syrah sat by the stove, her arms wrapped tightly around Lior. The boy, once pale and trembling, now breathed easier, his tiny chest rising and falling with more strength each day. The harsh winter had left scars on his skin and spirit, but the green hue of life was slowly returning to his cheeks. Her heart still ached for the suffering he endured, but this was the first sign of survival since the nightmare began. Daniel moved around the cabin like a man determined to hold the fragile thread of life from slipping away. He chopped wood with swift, practiced strokes, his breath visible in the cold air. He kept the fire roaring, boiled water for tea, and prepared small meals from the sparse supplies in the station. Each act was purposeful. Survival wasn't just about staying alive anymore. It was about protecting something precious. Syrah watched him, her emerald eyes tracing the lines of his weathered face. He was a puzzle she didn't yet understand. Human and yet different, haunted by battles she could only guess at. His dark hair fell over his forehead, damp from the snow outside, and his eyes held a mixture of determination and exhaustion. She wondered what had brought him to this frozen edge of the world, alone, until he found her and Lior. Their gazes met, and Daniel offered a small, tired smile. "You're stronger than you look," he said quietly. Syrah's lips twitched. "You don't look so bad yourself." A quiet laugh broke the tension, soft but genuine. It was the first real moment of lightness in days. Later that evening, after Lior was wrapped warmly in blankets and sleeping peacefully, Daniel sat beside her. The fire flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. "Tell me about where you come from," he said, his voice low and inviting. "You're home." Syrah hesitated, memories crashing over her like waves. Vibrant forests glowing in golden sunlight, skies painted with colors no human names, songs that echoed through crystal valleys. But also war, loss, exile. "It was beautiful once," she said softly, "a place of light and life. But everything changed. War chased us through the stars until there was nothing left." Daniel's face darkened with sorrow. "I'm sorry you had to lose it." She shook her head, brushing a strand of black hair behind her ear. "It's not your fault." They sat together in silence, the weight of their shared pain filling the quiet space. Yet, within that silence, a fragile trust began to grow, a bridge between two very different worlds. Days slipped by. The hum of the hunters drew nearer, relentless in their pursuit. But inside the cabin, small moments of life bloomed. Daniel showed Syrah how to set simple traps for food outside, how to track animals in the shifting snow, and how to read signs of danger hidden in the frozen landscape. His knowledge of the land was deep, born from years of solitude and survival. Syrah, in turn, shared stories of her people, tales of art, music, and stars that sang in the night sky. Her voice carried warmth, and even Daniel found himself captivated by her words. Lior's laughter rang out one afternoon as Daniel lifted him high into the air. The boy's green eyes sparkled with joy, a rare light breaking through the shadow of fear and cold. They were no longer just strangers trapped in a storm. They had become a family, bound by need, by love, by the will to survive. One night, when the storm finally softened to a quiet whisper, Daniel and Sira stepped outside together. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling faintly above the endless ice. Daniel reached out, his hand finding hers in the cold. His fingers were warm, steady. "We'll get through this," he promised. Together. Her heart surged with hope, fragile but real. The frozen world around them was harsh and unforgiving, but in that moment, the warmth between them was a fire that no winter could snuff out. The quiet after the storm was a lie. No one could stay safe forever, especially not when the hunters were relentless. The distant hum returned, deeper now, more threatening. The icy walls of the ranger station seemed to tremble as the sound drew closer, a dark shadow cutting through the snowy landscape outside. Sira sat clutching Lior, who whimpered softly in his sleep, the fear that had clung to them since they'd landed now blooming into a crushing weight. Daniel paced near the door, every muscle taut, eyes scanning the frozen wilderness beyond the window. "They're coming," he said grimly. "We've got maybe minutes before they find us." Sira's heart hammered. She tightened her grip on her son, feeling his tiny body shudder. "What do we do?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "We fight. We run. Whatever it takes." Suddenly, a sharp, mechanical screech cut through the night, the sound of metal grinding against metal. Outside, the snow shifted violently as something large moved through the drifts, the glowing blue light of the hunters slicing the darkness. Sira's breath caught. "They're here." Daniel grabbed a heavy metal rod from the corner, whatever he could use as a weapon. "We're not going down without a fight," he said fiercely. The door shook violently as pounding thundered against it, metal claws scraping at the wood. Lior stirred, eyes fluttering open. Sira pressed a finger to his lips, whispering calm words in her language. Daniel looked to her. "We need a plan." There was no time for fear, only action. With quick determination, Daniel helped Sira gather their few belongings, the blanket, some food, a small medkit. "We split up," he said. "You and Lior take the back exit. I'll hold them off here." Sira shook her head, panic rising. "No, I won't leave you." Daniel's face softened for a moment. "It's the only way." She swallowed hard, knowing the truth behind his words. He handed her a small, heavy pack. "Run fast. Don't look back." Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded. As Daniel moved to barricade the front door, Sira took Lior's hand, heading toward the narrow back door. The hunters burst in with a sound like thunder, their machines crushing through the fragile wood and snow. Daniel met them with everything he had, swinging the rod, dodging deadly blades, buying time with desperate ferocity. Behind him, Sira slipped out into the cold night, heart pounding. Lior clutched tight. Snow blinded her vision, but she ran, faster than she ever thought possible. The distant roars of battle faded, replaced by the eerie silence of the frozen world. But she knew Daniel was out there, fighting for them. The cold bit at her skin. The wind howled like a living beast. Her legs burned, lungs burned. Then she stumbled, snow swallowing her ankle, dragging her down. A sharp cry escaped her lips. Lior cried out, too. Sira scrambled up, tears freezing on her cheeks. She had to keep moving. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Daniel. Blood stained his clothes, a gash on his arm dripping red onto the snow. He reached for her, breath ragged. "You made it," he gasped. "I couldn't leave you," she said, voice breaking. He smiled weakly. "You're stronger than I thought." Together, they limped toward a dense cluster of trees, a small promise of cover, of life. The hunters were relentless, but so were they. In the cold wilderness, with the snow closing in, love and survival collided in a battle that would leave scars. On their bodies, their hearts, their souls. The forest was a silent kingdom of ice and snow, the towering pines weighed down with heavy frost that clung to every branch like crystalline armor. The moon hung low and pale in the sky, casting silver shadows across the frozen ground. Daniel and Syrah pressed themselves against the rough bark of an ancient pine, the coarse texture grounding them in the cold wilderness. Between them, Leor shivered softly, his tiny body nestled safely within their protective embrace. The violent clash at the ranger station had left deep marks, not just in bruises and cuts, but etched into their very spirits. Daniel's arm throbbed painfully, blood caked around a fresh gash that refused to stop bleeding. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale sharp and shallow, but his grip on survival was unyielding. Syrah's muscles ached from the brutal flight through the snow, the cold biting through even the thick layers they wore. Yet, despite the pain, the three had survived. For long moments, they sat in a fragile silence, listening to the soft whisper of snow settling on pine needles and the distant creak of branches bowing under their frozen burden. The storm had passed, leaving behind a calm as delicate and fragile as glass. Syrah looked down at Leor, brushing a gloved hand gently over his forehead. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice thick with relief and exhaustion. "We're safe." Daniel nodded, eyes scanning the darkened forest beyond. "For now," he muttered, the words carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Danger still lurked, waiting in the shadows of the frozen wilderness. The cold gnawed at their bodies relentlessly, but the fire burning inside them, the bond forged by shared hardship, kept them moving forward. Daniel slowly pushed himself to his feet, testing the weight on his injured arm with a grimace. "There's an old hunting cabin about 2 miles east," he said, voice low but steady. "It's small, but it'll keep us warm." Syrah nodded, cradling Leor closer. The boy's eyelids fluttered, heavy with exhaustion, his breathing shallow but steady. His fragile body had endured so much, yet there was a spark of life still burning within him. They moved cautiously through the dense forest, each crunch of snow underfoot sharp and loud in the heavy silence. The cold air bit deep, stinging exposed skin and making every breath a test of endurance. Daniel led the way with sure-footed confidence, even as pain lanced through his arm. When the silhouette of the cabin finally emerged through the trees, a wave of relief washed over them all. The building was weathered, its wood darkened and rough, but the roof was intact, and a thick stack of firewood lay piled beside the door. Daniel forced the heavy wooden door open with a grunt, revealing a small room lit only by moonlight filtering through frost-covered windows. Inside, the scent of dry wood and dust filled the air, and a stove sat cold in the corner. A promise of warmth, if only they could coax it alive. As Daniel set to work building a fire, Syrah gently wrapped Leor in thick, warm blankets. She pressed her cheek to his cool skin, feeling the faint flutter of his heartbeat beneath her lips. For the first time in days, tears escaped her eyes, tears not of fear or pain, but pure relief. Daniel's steady hands moved with practiced ease, striking a match and feeding kindling into the stove. The flames flickered to life, slowly growing into a steady glow that began to push back the chill that had settled into their bones. He caught Syrah's gaze and reached out, his fingers brushing hers in a quiet, grounding touch. "We'll get through this," he said softly. Together, her eyes met his in the flickering firelight, and for the first time since the nightmare began, she allowed herself to hope, to imagine a future beyond the cold and the fear. But outside, the world remained unforgiving. The hunters still prowled, their relentless search a constant threat. Yet, within the small cabin, a fragile sanctuary blossomed. They shared the sparse food Daniel had packed, eating slowly and in silence, savoring the small comfort it provided. Syrah spoke softly of her lost home, a distant world of shimmering forests, glowing skies, and endless stars that once felt like family. Her voice carried the weight of memories, both beautiful and devastating. Daniel shared his own stories, of battles fought in the shadow of his own world, a place where cold wasn't always weather, but a feeling that lived inside people. Leor's laughter returned slowly, a fragile light in the darkness. Daniel lifted the boy into his arms, spinning him gently as laughter echoed in the small space. They were no longer just survivors trapped in a storm. They had become a family, an unlikely, fragile bond forged in ice and fire. That night, As the fire crackled and the wind moaned against the cabin walls, Syrah finally let herself rest, the exhaustion pulling her under like a tide. Daniel sat nearby, watchful but calm, the quiet guardian of this small flame of life. The battle was far from over, but for now, in this stolen moment, they had each other, and that was enough. The cold outside had softened, the snow settling into a quiet blanket over the forest floor. The relentless storm had passed, leaving behind a world changed but still alive. Inside the small hunting cabin, the fire's glow warmed tired bodies and weary souls. Syrah sat by the window, watching the pale morning light seep through the frost. Her thoughts drifted, memories of a home lost, a war that shattered worlds, and a fragile thread of hope that still held her and Leor alive. Daniel stirred quietly, breaking the silence. He had been sitting nearby, tending the fire, his eyes distant but alert. "We made it this far," he said softly. "That counts for something." Syrah looked over, meeting his gaze. "It does. But how much further can we go? The hunters are still out there. They won't stop." Daniel nodded. "Maybe, but we're stronger than they think." She allowed herself a small smile, a rare light in the shadow of their struggles. "We have to be." The quiet between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken bond of survival and shared pain. Leor stirred in her lap, blinking sleepily. Syrah brushed his hair back, feeling the fragile warmth of life in his small frame. "You saved him," Daniel said quietly, more to himself than to her. Syrah's eyes filled with tears. "So did you." They had all changed, marked by loss, but also by a resilience that no hunter could erase. Over the following days, they worked together to fortify their shelter, ration supplies, and plan for the uncertain road ahead. The threat was never far, but so was their growing strength, in each other and in the fragile family they had become. Syrah found herself opening up, sharing stories of her people, their love for art, music, and the stars. Daniel listened, fascinated and humbled by the glimpse into a world so different yet so full of beauty. In turn, Daniel shared pieces of his own life, the loneliness of human survival, the battles waged not just against nature, but against despair. Their connection deepened, woven through shared moments of quiet and crisis. One evening, as the fire burned low, Daniel looked at Syrah with a seriousness that caught her off guard. "What happens next?" he asked. She sighed, the weight of uncertainty heavy. "We keep moving forward. For Leor. For us." He nodded, reaching out to take her hand. Together, in the cold aftermath, they found not just survival, but purpose. The hunters might still hunt, the world might still be cruel, but for the first time in a long while, hope felt real. They were no longer just victims of fate, but architects of their own future. The harsh winter had passed, and the first hints of spring crept through the frozen forest. Ice melted into trickling streams, and pale green shoots pushed their way through the snow's stubborn blanket. The world was awakening again, fragile, uncertain, but full of promise. Syrah stood outside the small cabin, her breath forming clouds in the crisp morning air. Leor played nearby, his laughter bright and free, a sound that had become the heartbeat of their new life. Daniel worked to clear a path through the snow, his movements steady and sure, his gaze occasionally drifting toward the mother and child he had come to care for more than he ever expected. The scars they carried were not just physical but etched deep in their souls. Yet, those marks had shaped them, forged by fire and ice into something stronger, a family bound not by blood, but by choice and sacrifice. Syrah's green skin caught the soft sunlight, and her black hair swayed gently in the breeze. She wore simple clothes now, practical, worn, but comfortable. The alien queen who once fled the stars had found a new throne here, in this rugged land of snow and survival. Daniel approached her, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. "You ready to see what's next?" he asked, a spark of hope in his voice. She smiled, a genuine, rare light shining in her eyes. "I think I am." Together, they walked toward the edge of the forest where a small clearing waited, a place they had prepared to build a new home, a future. Leor ran ahead, his green eyes wide with wonder at the blooming life around him. His laughter echoed like music, a reminder that life, no matter how fragile, always finds a way. As they stood there, the world stretched out before them. Endless possibilities in the crisp air, the promise of survival, love, and hope. Daniel took Syrah's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, silently sealing the bond forged in fire and ice. "We made it," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "Together." If you've ever believed in impossible love, in survival against all odds, then Syrah and Daniel's story is for you. It's a tale of sacrifice, courage, and the fierce power of connection, reminding us all that even in the coldest places, the warmest hearts can find each other. Thank you for joining this journey through ice, danger, and hope. If you love this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. There are many more stories waiting to warm your heart. Leave your thoughts and favorite moments in the comments below. What would you do if you were in Syrah's place? How far would you go to protect someone you love? Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Stay tuned for the next thrilling tale of human and alien hearts intertwined.